and welcome to another ski analysis project. So today it's a really interesting one, Jamie, because what we have is Steve, who should have been doing one of our level 1, level 2 ski courses, ski instructor courses, and obviously it was cancelled due to COVID. So he's been left to his own devices. He did remain in Austria throughout the season and actually skied all the time. And of course, one of the big things that Jamie and I both agree with is that, you know, practice makes permanent. It doesn't make perfect, but it makes permanent. So if you're permanently doing and practicing the wrong movement pattern, you're going to make that a habit that becomes really difficult to break. And that's the danger. One of the, you know, when Steve sent me all these emails, one of the things I did say to him is, in his case, he's somebody who really would benefit from some face-to-face coaching. And this brings us to a topic we'll cover in one of the future podcasts where we talk about online coaching, for example, that's popping up all over the place. A lot of it's due to COVID and people being penniless and thinking, God, I need to do something. I'll charge people for some online coaching. You need to be very careful about that and very cautious, especially when it comes to skiing. And I'll talk about that more in the podcast when I talk about how people are just echoing on these social media platforms at the minute and what I mean by that. But we're looking at Steve because he's a great subject to look at. He sits in this idea of people, I don't know exactly why he's doing this, but he's definitely 40 plus, if not 50 plus. And he's obviously either took a sabbatical from work or he's retired from his current employment and looking to do this as his little hobby at the other side. You know, it's like a backward gap year, isn't it? We get a lot of these people doing this sort of stuff nowadays.
Making the right decision in life, yes.
Yeah, very late, but making the right decision. So it presents a great... it's a great project for everyone to look at. If we look at his skiing, and, you know, you can see it on the screen here, you can see how this would be the sort of average person, 50 plus, coming on one of our courses, who has been skiing, you know, relatively a long time, but probably not under the influence of a high-end coach. So he sent me and asked me to critique his skiing so he could practice a few little things. Now that's difficult because from an online perspective and me talking to him by email, I sent him stills of the video, which I can put some of them up on the screen now to show you what we were looking at. Jamie, we both identified very quickly again that it's quite easy to look at somebody skiing and start highlighting some major flaws. Obviously, like Jamie and I are both very positive. We're very happy when a client comes down and they can get down a run. They're fast enough. They're sort of turning and controlling themselves. So there's a lot of positives. But we obviously can quickly see the issues with what's going on low down in the ankle joint, couldn't we?
Yeah, I mean the ankle joint is the king or is the queen in skiing, is everything. It's the centering joint. It's the closest joint to the platform, so it's the joint that you should be using the most because it's going to react the quickest with the platform. And Steve is not really using it at all. It's quite dead, and he's more using things instead of from bottom to top, from top to bottom. He's using his hip, his pelvis, as opposed to the ankle joint.
He's very, very hip dominant, isn't he? And the hip dominance comes later on when he sends me the third video that you'll see. I explained to him, look, how do you pick something up off the floor when it drops on the ground? And as older people, we just hinge from our hip and we don't use our knee or ankle. We just hinge from the hip to bend down. And this is how he's skiing. He's hinging from his hip more than actually activating the ankle and knee and he's not a lazy guy, but that's what it is. It's lazy skiing in effect.
It's just that it's that bad practice almost. It's just every time you're moving, you're developing motor patterns, and he's developed bad patterns. You know, practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. So he does need a coach. Obviously, the emails will help, but he does need somebody to be on the hill with him to drill it into him a bit.
Yeah. So I wrote back to him after this first email and said to him, look at the point where I've stopped you. with the orange line. So let's change that line to orange. And I think I had them stopped in the fall line. This is the point where you would need some ability to have the center of mass move away from the skis. So he's in the fall line, I think, about here. And basically, this is the problem he has, is he's standing over the top of the skis, Jamie, isn't he? And he's not going to have any grip at this stage because the skis are almost flat on the snow when really they should be at the highest edge point at this point in the turn. And therefore, there's no grip. And this is where we are with the first point. I also sent him some templates of other skiers skiing, so he understood what I meant by that. He also has a timing problem, I said, because as Jamie was going to probably come on to here, this like hard pushing, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think because his center of mass kind of goes up and down as opposed to fore and aft, forward and back, he's not on the center of the platform. We're balancing on a moving platform, so we need to anticipate its movement and move with the platform.
And I'll come in there with the up and down, because point 4 I said to Steve was, when teaching people to run, I educate people to limit their vertical movement because it creates a lot of problems, and to enhance their forward lean. This is in running, for example, like the pose method or something. So what Jamie's talking about is limiting this vertical, but trying to fore and aft more actively, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, if you're not on the center of the platform, or especially if you're negatively back instead of actively back or passively back, you just got lack of steering skills. So you'll search for something kind of either higher up the chain, so maybe pushing that outside ski away as a braking action to slow down, to reduce speed, and then the pelvis kind of pops out because the femur gets locked up in the hip socket, which is more what I'm kind of seeing with Steve here, as opposed to there's a good strong leg steering.
Yeah, so the 4 points I sent him, Jamie's basically hit exactly what I sent him as well. I stressed the necessity for him to improve his ankle tension, not just his mobility. What we're talking about here is the strength within the boot of being able to activate dorsiplantar flexion, the movements through the shin. And he needs to be far more active down here to pull and push, as Jamie's describing it as. Whoops. That's definitely not there. And Jamie's identified, yes, this is all hip dominant. We can see the ankle joint at this point here. It's even back over. It's actually leaning so heavy onto the cuff. There's no grip, which means he feels the speed build up. And because he has no grip in the fall line, he looks and searches for it at the very last second here. And this becomes a push. And of course, if we push, we're going to push the mass. Yeah, and that makes it very difficult to enter the new turn. So obviously, I think most people can see this. That's, at ski instructor level. So what do you then do?
I think at the recreational level as well, and maybe his instructor, maybe if he's had an instructor in the past, has said about pressurizing or maybe pushing after the fall line. Because every action has that equal and opposite reaction. So if he applies force to the ground pushes back with equal force, which reduces speed. It pushes the ski up the hill. But it's an actively pressurizing at this level as opposed to a pushing. And Steve's just a bit, bracing, acting, using that leg as a bit of an anchor to reduce speed instead of using an active steering method. Yeah.
And you can see he's actively trying to keep his body facing down the hill, but it's not helping.
There's a lot of positives, loads of positives. I mean, like you said at the start, we would be happy if this came into us as a guest, as a client. You can go, you can work reds and blues all day long. Yeah, cruisy runs, and you can work in technique. It's a good level skier to work with.
So I said what to do next, Steve, because obviously this was an email and I was pushed for time, but I did say, adopt a comfortable dynamic lower stance. So Jamie said he's quite a tall guy. Clearly he needs to adopt a lower stance, but don't end up crouching. We don't want people to be crouching and slumped over.
Actively flexed.
Yeah.
It's almost as if I grab your hair and pull you up and then just release you, and you kind of just relax into the boots. You settle into your boots.
Yeah. And rather than because he's so tall and because the slope is always dropping away from you, you're going downhill, just be aware that this huge vertical movement will do nothing but delay your ability to put outside ski pressure and outside ski grip. Because you can see at this point in the turn here, how he ends up floating and he's just doing nothing from there's the spray on the ski. nothing to right over here when we start to get a little bit of pressure again.
Yeah, I think when I work with clients on this angled terrain, I think it's a shallow red, this one, so maybe blue-red. I talk more about, if we're going to talk about unweighting or upweighting, I generally talk more about forward motion, because it's an extension that creates that forward motion as opposed to an upwards motion. But let's say about the weighting aspect, trying to maintain pressure on the platform as you're extending forwards, as opposed to just releasing all that energy. The only time I really have to maybe release is if we're talking steep terrain, because you can't manage the forces that are building up after the steering phase.
Yeah. So
I would definitely be talking about him about, don't go light at the start of the turn. Try and feel a constant pressure throughout the arc instead of a light to heavy.
So we mentioned that. We mentioned about building pressure and edge before it's too late. Get a sensation of that. Edging above the fall line.
But all these things that Paul's mentioning, to receiving an email, it's quite hard to figure those things out for yourself as a relative novice, or even as an advanced skier. So I think this is why online coaching works to a degree, but I think it works more with high-end athletes, because you have to have a large understanding of the sport, but 2 and 3 is proprioceptional and kinesthetic awareness, and awareness of your own body in space, and awareness of what you're feeling when you're skiing down. I think that's the limit of you lacking mileage or quality mileage, or you don't come from a strong sporting background.
Yeah, I think, as Jamie says, if you're already quite an experienced skier, you can benefit a lot from some online information. But if you don't understand the product, and this is the problem when I talk about in some of the podcasts, I've mentioned the thing like Dunning-Kruger effect. And this is where you get a lot of people who, they've done 10, 20 weeks and they think they know quite a bit about skiing, but really they don't, and they really still need hands-on, somebody there to assist them and give them some tasks to do. So I ended up by giving Steve some tasks to do anyway, and obviously I could see other things happening. Interestingly, he doesn't do any pole planting. Now in the next video I'm going to show you, he then throws this pole plant in. I never mentioned to him at the time. But I wanted to look at this video because he sends me the second one on the 20th.
Is the pole plant a new skill that he's just learned?
No, I don't know why he didn't do it on the first one. And I'm guessing that was because it was a long turn, and you often see that people doing long turns at this level.
That was a long turn?
Yeah, I think he was thinking that was a long turn. But now he does a short turn. And in the short turn, I noticed this pole plant was extremely flamboyant and disruptive. And what I said on this one, so he sends it now, said, he's had a look at things. He's trying to follow the points that I've sent him. And I really start to mention a couple of things, because this run actually is about 1:38 long. He goes on for quite a long time in this short term, which again, people who are not, well, Jamie, you maybe explain.
So for me I say skiing is an MF sport. When it comes down to it is there's so much, obviously technique wise, but physically, it's such a physically demanding sport. It's not a leisure activity, and that's the thing that I'm trying to hammer home to my clients on from day one when they come into me, to get them to put some physical effort in, not just to throw big masses around, use the muscle groups that they're supposed to be using. And I think that's kind of clear here. If you can go down doing a short turn for 1:38, then you're a very, very fit guy, or you're not doing too much to the platform.
Yeah, and you're probably allowing gravity to pull you down.
Yeah, I think it's cruisy. Skiing is a sport. We've got to understand that from day one. We've got to really start trying to put something in to get something out. Otherwise, you'll just stay the same. You'll get a little better, you get a little bit more comfortable because of mileage, but you really need to start to bring some physicality into it.
Yeah. I mean, I've mentioned before in a couple of years back about ski instructors making mistakes of focusing too much on the hands, because there are so many movements between the hand and the ankle that could be adjusted. But it's still important, because when it's as flamboyant as this and it's like swung so far out,
looks like he's about to spear a fish.
Yeah, it's almost like it will have a counteraction of wanting him to push the opposite direction with his arse.
Obviously, the more you move this around, the more creates, or the potential to create rotation in the upper body. And the more you move your upper body off your axis, the longer it takes you to reset that before you have access to your legs. So you want to try and keep the body and arms as still as possible at all times. So then you have access to the correct things for absorption and steering.
So I wrote back to him and said, in this case, I hear a lot of instructors talking about the importance of ankle mobility, like dorsiflexion. What they need to stress is creating flexion at the foot is relatively easy for students. Even, if you are limited in your mobility in your ankle, which when I measure ankle mobility, many people are limited. But because boots have ramp angles and etc., you don't need as much as you might think. Now, I do mention clearly to him, I am assuming the boot you are wearing is correctly fitted. Obviously, I can't put my hands onto his boot, and I can give him some advice to look at to say, is there space here? Is there space there?
Yeah, I think obviously if you actually were physically skiing with Steve, and if he looked the same at the end of the day as he did at the start of the day, you would, or maybe after just a few runs, you would start questioning his equipment. Because you do see this a lot when people have boots that are way too big. That they just end up dead in the ankle joint because they've got no leverage from the joint because they're kind of floating inside the boot.
So what I continue to say is that many instructors fail to address ankle tension. They're there with the ankle flexion. Oh, you need to dorsiflex, you need to push through the shin of the boot or whatever it is. But what they fail to understand is when somebody starts momentum down a hill, they start focusing on the ski run, the turning, etc. And all of a sudden, they switch off the muscles that are required to maintain that tension and flexion in the ankle joint. And this is what's happening here. And once you switch off that movement, that muscle structure, it's very hard to activate it. It's a bit like when people are trying to sit correctly, you'll say to somebody, oh, sit up straight. They end up slouching because the glutes naturally switch off as you sit down, and when your glutes are switched off, it makes it difficult to remain in a good posture. But to correct your posture, you would have to stand back up correctly and sit back down correctly. You can't correct your posture when you're sitting. So I see people go, oh yeah, I need to sit properly, but that puts the spine into extension. And this is the same with skiing. When people lose their momentum and their tension within the ankle and the stability, they can't just switch it back on. It's hard for the brain to do that. It'll tend to then use the hip instead. And this is what you see happening. He skied off. He knows he should be forward, that terrible word from ski instructors as well. And
it's centered.
So he goes down correctly at the very start of his run. He gets himself stacked up on his skis. He thinks he's there. And then immediately after he pulls off after the first turn, here, this is ankle flexion, Jamie, yeah?
Yep.
Yeah? You see it. And then he makes his next turns and bump. Look, it's gone. Within 2 turns, can I just finish? Sorry. In 2 turns, he's lost that movement that looked really good on his first turn. And it's because he simply just doesn't understand that the shin, the muscles around there that hold that ankle tension need to be really strongly activated.
Yeah, I agree. I also think it's very shallow terrain as well, so there's no defensive skiing. I think as he goes down, he gets a little bit more defensive, or I wouldn't necessarily, maybe it's not terrain that is challenging to him, so it might not be defensive skiing, but I think just his natural motor pattern comes in because he has to steer more as the terrain steepens off, and he goes more into that kind of bracing action where the ankle appears to be more dead.
Yeah, so that concluded his second video he sent. So now we've picked up the flamboyant pole plant, which I told him about. Most of the email was me stressing and passionately trying to get across to him, ankles, you need to start working some home drills with your ankle to understand your ankle strength.
And the pole plant's there as a third point of contact to aid balance. It's a balancing tool. As the center of mass crosses over the base support, your hips move over your feet. It's there to act as a stabilizer, and it acts in timing with your pelvis moving forward, so the two move in harmony, if you like, and that's not the case there. The pole plant's just there for the sake of making a pole plant. So the pole plant should be there to help move the mass forward and help stabilize the body as the hip crosses over the feet.
So we then, on the 22nd of March, I received another video, another 2 videos, which actually, it's worth maybe quickly saying I received this video first, which I'm going to play through just so you can quickly see it. But if you're dealing with people online, etc., a video like this is all but useless to you. You know, nowadays with the modern school equipment we have, even iPhones and stuff, you obviously want to be close enough so your coach can actually see what's going on. Now, yeah, I can pick up some fundamental things, you know, that he's still doing, but it would be much better if the video was clear. And therefore I wrote back to him and said, look, Steve, can you please ask somebody who hasn't got a Nokia 5710 from 95, please send me send me a video of something a little bit more clear. And also Jamie was pointing out when we were off air, the importance of what angle are we looking at this? What viewpoint do we have of these turns?
Yeah,
Mostly it's sideways.
It's all about the angle. So it is, downhill. Ski directly to the camera if you're doing a short radius turn. If you're sending videos in, because it allows us to kind of see your perfect picture as to what's going on, what's not. Because sometimes if you are filming from the side or from behind, you can look out of position when you're actually not. So
yeah, I mean, in fairness, it would be great to have lots of angles, but be aware of where you're standing as a ski instructor when you're observing somebody can have an effect because of how the eyes work. So in this case, I asked him to resend the video, and he then did send me a more clear video. And this was his now 4th and 5th video in effect on the 22nd of March. And again, I'll come on to this in some of the future podcasts and analysis thing when I talk about the importance of what you do when you're not on the hill, especially in the 40s, 50s and 60s, 70s, etc. We need to be maintaining some sort of, you know, dynamics that we're able to maintain our ability to have good strength, good speed. And I write back to him this as well about what he should do over the summer and where he should focus his efforts over the summer as well. Jamie, where are we at now then?
We spoke about again just the ankle joint being quite dead in the previous videos, and it's the same when he kind of comes into this. I would say he's trying to do a long calf turn here, is he? Or
it looks like it,
yeah. And I think it's always the same. Everybody seems to build turns up from top to bottom as opposed to bottom to top. Your ankle is the closest thing to snow, so use it first. And
by the way, can I just interject there, because some people disagree with that and actually do it the opposite way around. I'll explain the biomechanics in future things and the physics behind whether you go from head to foot or foot to head. I'm not going to do that today, but Jamie's opinion of feet up over, he can back that up with his coaching style. You can 100%, make that work for all your clients, won't you?
For me, that's how it is, and it transcends across many different sports for myself that I've done in the past. So if I was a boxer, if I'm going to punch in the face, I generate power from the ground, not from my arm. So I need the ground to create force or to create performance. So I'm always going to go foot first. And what I see here is Steve using his hip predominantly, so we get a bit of sagittal split at the start of the turn. We get a bit of divergence in the skis where the skis moving away from each other at the start of the arc because the hip moves first. Yeah, and I mention this to Steve a lot, where Steve, look at your stance. It goes from like narrow to wide, or diverges, and this is typical. Sorry, Jim. Yeah, that's also just because the old steering ski is tracking in the direction of the old turn, and the new steering ski is tracking the direction of the new turn, because he's just moving up as opposed to moving forward and allowing his hips to cross over the platform or the platform to cross underneath his hips. So it creates this big widening of the stance and then narrowing of the stance. He's still got a lot of this pressure. Vertical action as opposed to fore and aft and inside outside. So we're talking about he still thinks this plane, and we talk this plane and fore and aft more. Yeah, there is an extension and flexion, but it's which way you're moving. Again, it's you're balancing on a moving platform, and Steve's not anticipating that movement at the moment, so he's just going up and down like you would if they were standing on terra firma solid ground doing a squat. He's making almost like a squat movement where the ground's still, but he's going to make this kind of almost squatting action, if you like, if the ground was sliding away from him, and stay centered on his feet. Yeah, so I finish off with a big, obviously, explanation email again with some still shots to try and help him understand again where we're at.
Obviously, I do place a lot of stress that he needs some off-hill work because when you're on your skis at this age especially, I do feel it's not easy because, you know, things are happening. You're on a moving platform and I'm asking you to do something and the platform's moving at the same time. So being able to stand on solid ground and actually just see what you can do on solid ground with movements is very important, which is why yesterday, or the day before, I think I popped up a YouTube video about leg mobility drills that might help Steve to understand what I mean by what he needs to do in the summer.
I think if you just look at any successful high-end athlete or football, soccer, how that changed in the 90s or whatever, when they started bringing, you know, quality of diet in, dietitians in, and all nutritionists and all these different things, and different coaches, not just people who were focused on football, but people who had different backgrounds and started, you know, bringing in strength and conditioning coaches and different things like that. How the sport evolved. If you look at Anthony Joshua, he doesn't just box to become the top of his game. He does so much more in the strength and conditioning plane and the coordination plane. So I just think it's what you do outside of your sport that makes you very good at your sport. So the more you can do off the hill, the better you'll be.
Absolutely. So I finished off with some very basic, because he only has another 2 weeks left. And I said, look, you know, it'll be a certain advantage to you. I think I was taking the piss a bit, but I said, you know, maybe ski slower without poles to get more centered. Taking some of these poles off them is not always ideal, but there's a time and a place for it. And I sort of said to him, like, you know, do a few runs without poles. And I said, actually do a few days without poles, because it would really, you know, stop that flamboyant pole plant also. But mainly there isn't a reliance on the upper body too much here, isn't there?
Yeah, I think it depends on the level of your client. And when it, like you say, when it is appropriate, I kind of like, when I've got more advanced, like the Landis 1 and 2 here in Austria, so the higher kind of coaching courses, just taking the poles away and crossing the arms across the body so they can feel a stability in the body. And if they don't have that stability in the body's rotating, they can kind of feel that rotation and then limit the rotation through creating stability. And it just allows them to focus on the legs. Like you say, by taking things away in the upper body, it allows them to tune into where you should be steering and absorbing from. So, you know, makes people focus in a little bit more.
I sort of mentioned to Steve on all three of my responses about him trying to soften. It's a topic that I've got to tackle at some time, because I know a couple of the comments were for me to tackle concentric, eccentric movement patterns. What we mean by this is Steve clearly, like many people, and I'm having this problem myself at the minute just through an injury, is the softening at the end of the turn. So I'm not a great fan of drills, but this is a drill style skiing here. Although I actually see this as a style of skiing at the minute, particularly in certain areas of the world, where we are seriously softening. So if you watch as I come round the turn, as opposed to pushing, you'll see that I actively go in the ankle and the knee quite low and release the turn with this almost like spitting out of the skis in front of me, falling to the inside and then developing angulation. And it's this softening that I was trying to explain to Stephen that he needs at the end of the turn, Jamie. You know, like he's doing that at the end of the turn, pushing. And to stop the pushing, you would do like a maximum movement drill or something like that.
Yeah, I think obviously at every level really it is just maximize, take things to an extreme, and then you can fine tune them after that point so they can get a sensation of what's going on. Especially when we said, you know, I used some big words for me before of kinesthetic awareness, proprioception awareness. When athletes are limited in that kind of field, is you've got to try and develop those skill sets through going to extremes. So I think something like this would be ideal of just really playing about with at the end movement, of the turn. Because but I think, let's say you demonstrate a really ridiculous range of movement that is too excessive for the turn. The client generally gets about 5 to 10% of that. So you're just then starting to build in good movement patterns and motor skills. And you know, Steve has got a bit of a bracing, or very much bracing action going on. So
can we just stop there? If he's pushing at the end of the turn, Jamie, and how can we stop him pushing? We've tried to tell him. You try and tell him, look, don't push. I mean, let's face it, you can tell somebody and they go to stop. But if he doesn't, eventually you need to go to an extreme. So an extreme would be here is do the opposite, almost compress at the end of the turn in a sense.
I think terrain first would be the first thing of taking it out on something easy, just in case it is a psychological reason that he's pushing the ski to reduce speed. Say if he's got the steering skill on the easier terrain. If he hasn't, then it is addressing that on the flatter terrain first and taking it to some kind of extreme
drill. Because at the minute, in effect, what Jamie and I are saying about Steve's turn is it's stop, start, stop, start, stop, start, stop, start. And to get a rhythm and flow, you want it to just be more smooth and constant. So he needs to disrupt the motor pattern he has. And this is coming now in a full circle to where I started from and said, look, if you're in your 50s and 60s and you are going to be coming onto a ski course, be ready, because you can teach an old dog new tricks, but there's going to be a lot of disruption and it's going to be frustrating, because you're going to be doing things that are the complete opposite of what you have been doing maybe for 50 years, and that's not easy. Yeah,
it might not be it might not be the opposite of what you've been told. You just maybe haven't been able to achieve it in the past. And obviously, we're going to do every extreme that we need to get you to where you need to be to pass an exam, or just to become a better skier and just enjoy skiing more.
Yeah. Well, that's great. We've had another fantastic little chat there. Anybody got any comments? Comment below, and we'll see you on the next one.
Ciao for now.